Welcome to Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress panel discussion entitled Moving Forward at a Distance, Tools for Keeping Local Government Open for Business While on Pause. My name is Beth Bianconi, and I'm a partner at Delaware Engineering DPC, a civil engineering firm specializing in public infrastructure in the Hudson Valley. Today's panel discussion will provide expert information as well as tips and tools to keep local government open for business while maintaining social distancing and remote work restrictions. We are in uncharted waters in the current landscape of construction stoppages, closures of non-essential businesses, municipal workforce reduction, and working remotely. This discussion features 5 panelists sharing insights, inspiration, and strategies for keeping local government open through technology and alternate means of engaging the public. Today with us, we have Lyle Anderson. He provides information technology support to the town of Newcastle in Westchester County. He was Chief Information Officer for News Corporation TV Guide and has over 30 years of experience in technology and media. We also have Chris Burdick, who is the full-time supervisor of the town of Bedford in Westchester County. Elected as supervisor in 2013, he was a prior town board member. He was a chief underwriting counsel for Stewart Title Insurance of New York prior to being elected supervisor. Norma Drummond is the Westchester County Planning Commissioner. She began work with the county in 1986 in economic development and was named County Planning Commissioner in 2018. She has been the chair of the Town of East Fishkill Planning Board and currently serves as the chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals in the town. Eric Gordon is a principal member of Keen & Bean PC in White Plains, Westchester County, where he has been since 1999. Prior to working at Keen & Bean, Eric served as a law clerk in the United States District Court for the Southern District of California and practiced law in San Diego, California. He specializes in municipal, land use and zoning, labor and employment, construction and insurance defense law, and general civil litigation. And our final panelist is Kristen ONeil. She's the Assistant Director of the New York State Committee on Open Government, where she has been since 2015. Prior to her work at the Department of State, she was an attorney with the New York State Office of Mental Health and the New York State Insurance Department. Welcome, panelists. For purposes of discussion today, we have developed 4 topic areas related to local government operations. Those are open meetings, technology, local government functions, and public contracts. For each topic, I'll state a series of questions and ask a specific panelist to provide expert information with regard to the topic. Next, I'll ask several panelists to discuss their experience with the topic in practice, providing tips and tools as well as the benefits and drawbacks of their approaches. So our first topic is open meetings. And some of the questions that have come up are, what is the effect of executive orders on the conduct of public business in terms of meetings and hearings, including quorum requirements and voting requirements? What are the public notice requirements for remote or virtual meetings, hearings, public bid openings, and the like? And can executive sessions and referendums be conducted at this time? And for this topic, I'd like to ask Kristen ONeil from the New York State Council Committee on Open Government to address these as a factual matter. Kristen?
Thank you, Mary Beth. Thanks for having me. Executive Order 202.1, which was issued on March 13th, 2020 by Governor Cuomo, suspends certain aspects of the open meetings law to the extent necessary to permit any public body to meet and take actions authorized by the law without permitting in public, in-person access to the meetings. Now authorizes such meetings to be held remotely by conference call or similar service, provided that the public has the ability to view or listen to such proceedings and that such proceedings are recorded and later transcribed. That's the language of the executive order. And from my perspective, the executive order has 2 primary aspects. First, while the order is in effect, members of the public body do not need to be physically present at a primary meeting location in order to be considered present for the purposes of counting towards a quorum. They can participate and vote during the meeting if they comply instead with the open meetings law. So members can participate if they comply instead with the executive order. So members can participate by teleconference or video conference. And if they do participate by video conference, which is allowed under the open meetings law as well, there are certain things that the open meetings law would require that are going to be suspended because there's no in-person right to in-person attendance. So, for example, the meeting notice does not need to identify the location from which each member of the public body is participating, nor does it need to indicate that the public is welcome to attend from the locations from which the board members are teleconferencing or video conferencing. So if each individual board member is teleconferencing or video conferencing from their living room, there's no obligation to provide in the notice where each board member's, like their home address is in those meeting notices. Let's see. The second primary aspect of Executive Order 202.1, which is currently in effect until May 7th. That was extended a couple of weeks ago by Governor Cuomo in Executive Order 202.14, extended the application of this executive order through May 7th. So the second primary aspect of the executive order, it allows public bodies to prohibit public in-person attendance at their open meetings as long as the body provides the public with a mechanism for viewing or listening to the proceeding while the meeting is occurring, so contemporaneously, and provided that the meeting is recorded and later transcribed. I want to point out, just as a quick aside here, that many remote access services will record and transcribe the meeting for you. Right now, we are using Zoom. Zoom does record the meetings for you, and it will prepare a transcript. I've been advised that the transcript isn't great, but in my view, any transcript prepared by the remote access service would comply with the executive order. So while 202.1 gave public bodies the discretion to decide whether to allow in-person attendance, subsequent executive orders required that all non-essential gatherings of any size be canceled. So in our opinion, this means that public bodies must prohibit in-person attendance in order to avoid hosting a non-essential gathering. So more recently, the governor also issued Executive Order 202.15, which states that any local official, state official, or local government or school, which by virtue of any law has a public hearing scheduled, public hearing, as opposed to a public meeting, a public hearing scheduled, or otherwise required to take place in April or May of 2020 shall be postponed until June 1st, 2020 without prejudice. However, such hearing may continue if the convening public body or official is able to hold the public hearing remotely through use of telephone conference, video conference, and or similar service. So when 202.1 first came out, I got a lot of questions about public hearings, and my response to that was, well, 202.1 only suspends aspects of the open meetings law, so you also need to look at the statutory requirements that govern that specific type of hearing. But this most recent executive order makes clear that hearings can also be held through the use of telephone conference or similar service. In terms of public notice, executive orders do not suspend any aspects of the open meetings law or any other statute governing public hearings relating to the provisions of notice. Public bodies should continue to provide notice of meetings and hearings in compliance with the appropriate statutes. However, from a practical perspective, it would make sense that in place of a location, the meeting notice should provide instructions to the public for remotely accessing the meeting. And finally, the question is, can executive sessions and votes be conducted at this time? If the public body is in compliance with the open meetings law as amended by the executive order, it is able to take any actions, including motions to enter into executive session or any other motions, proposals, or resolutions they would otherwise take during a meeting. Executive sessions can take place via the use of breakout rooms, separate teleconferences, or any other mechanism which would allow the public body to conduct a portion of the meeting behind virtual closed doors. Thank you, Mary Beth.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I'd like to ask both Chris and Norma to tell us about how they're finding complying with the executive orders and conducting public meetings under our New York pause executive orders that we have going on. Let's start with Chris. How are you making out? And unfortunately, we're going to have to keep it moving. So
Sure.
briefly.
And thank you as well for the opportunity to be on this panel. We find that we have to adapt very quickly, and I think we have done that. We started in practice with making sure that our town board meetings could go forward. We felt that that was the most important of the public bodies that we needed to resume in operation, because we have to approve expenditures, we have to take certain actions in order to keep the operations of the town government rolling. And we followed everything that Kristen had outlined a couple minutes ago in terms of complying with the executive orders. And those, for example, where we have public hearings, we still have to send out mailings. And where we have identified the location, we've substituted it with how to get onto the Zoom meeting. And we are using the Zoom platform. And we are on a plan now so that it can have as many as 300 people participate in it. And we don't have it cut off by time and so forth. So that's worked fine. We then extended it to our permitting boards and had training sessions with our permitting boards so they understood how to manage the platform. And it has been working surprisingly well. And one of the things as we come to towards the end of this session is to discuss the silver linings and what we will take when we all come out of this, because we think that there are definitely things that we can do after we emerge from this terrible situation.
Thank you, Chris. Norma, what's your experience been?
So just last week, we conducted our first Westchester County Planning Board meeting through the county's platform of WebEx. We actually did a training session like Chris also suggested. We did it the week before just to let our planning board members who come from all different places within the county to be able to train them on how to use the system, about muting and other things just to make the meeting work well. One of the things we actually found we worked best was the chair had a list then of the names and actually did a roll call vote of every action that needed a vote. That's not normally how we do our sessions, but the town is then able to take the county is able to take the recording of the meeting. We're able to put it on our county YouTube channel so that anybody who wants to be able to view the meeting can then watch it on their own time. So the timing worked well because everybody's home. It was easier to get a quorum. That's one of the issues, one of the benefits of this. So yeah, all in all, the WebEx platform, it worked for this function once folks got used to the technical aspects of using it.
That's terrific. That's great to hear. I guess my next question is going to be talking about technology. So we're going to have technology is obviously an incredibly important part of moving this forward. And our questions are, what technology is being used to conduct virtual meetings? What are the benefits and drawbacks of the different technologies? What options are there for broadcast of meetings, live and recorded? What technology is being used for participation by board members, staff, applicants, the public? What about security? And for me in particular, because I'm not sure, what is Zoom bombing? And for this one, we're going to go to our IT expert, who is Lyle Anderson. Lyle.
Okay, thanks, Mary Beth. We'll save the Zoom bombing till the end. That's always the fun one everybody gets excited about. I'll try to cover things as briefly as possible. It's like the first section, it's a long topic that we have to boil down. But as far as the technology that we can use for these kind of meetings, I mean, I think we hit on two of them already. That's Zoom and WebEx that Norma's using. Both are good. There's two other options that are popularly used for these kind of meetings. And one is GoToMeeting, that's available as part of LogMeIn. And the last one, if you're a Microsoft Enterprise client or Business Essentials client, is Microsoft Teams. And That's generally not used much by the public, but is used very heavily in the corporate world and to a certain extent in the government and municipal world. We just finished our 65th Zoom meeting this morning for the town of Newcastle. And we have done every town board, every executive session, every public hearing. We're doing bid openings. So we're actually running entirely electronically at this point. And what we do is we use a combination of a conference ability like Zoom, like Chris is doing, and then we add on something else for the public, and that could be either Facebook, YouTube, or we go out through our public access channels. And one thing we're probably unique in Newcastle is that I'm not part of Newcastle. I'm part of a Newcastle Community Media Center, and they've contracted with us to produce their website, all their newsletters, all their communications through Zoom, etc. So we're kind of a hybrid function with them. The question on broadcasts is really the one we prefer to use is YouTube. There are a lot of issues with Facebook with people either not liking it or having problems with it in the past. So if you want to broadcast a meeting, let's say from Zoom, it's very easy to do on YouTube. It takes about 2 minutes to set up and works great. We generally do the meetings, the public meetings, in what we call a webinar, which is a little different than the kind of meeting we're on today. And that we're having two levels of people. We're having participants, like everybody on the call, that have full access to the meeting. You can see them, talk to them. And then we have meeting attendees, which are the public. And the public has the right to type in on their chat window or the Q&A window questions and comments, which we'll respond to. Or if it's more of a longer dialogue, we can actually invite them into the meeting to talk and discuss an issue. And that has worked really well. We haven't had probably more than 20 townspeople on at a time, but for those that attend, they absolutely love it. The other area is dealing with planning boards and zoning boards with maps, surveys. Honestly, we found Zoom to be the best for actually displaying and sharing those kind of documents on the internet so other people can see them. It just does a better job. It's clearer and people can react. And the annotation facilities are really good. So you can actually write on the maps and draw, etc. The other thing, just to cover quickly, transcripts. That was an issue for us early on. And as I think Norma mentioned, or somebody mentioned, it was that Zoom is not terribly good on transcripts. YouTube's a little bit better. But we found two services out there you may want to look into. One is otter.ai. It's an artificial intelligence-based transcript facility that's very cheap. It's like $20 for 6,000 minutes of time. And they will actually create a really good transcript of a meeting. We're using this. Our legal counsel loves it. And it may not identify the name of the speakers, but it's very clear. It'll identify speaker 1 versus speaker 2 versus speaker 3. And the formatting actually looks really good. And that's something that's nice with Zoom. We just send the audio file out to them, and 2 hours later, we have a transcript. So that's just, and that will work, by the way, with WebEx and the others too. The other one's Rev, R-E-V, which is a manual transcription service. They cost about $1 a minute. So if you want very accurate transcriptions, they're the ones to contact, and their turnaround's about a day. As far as security, the biggest issue we've had is we've had people come in on telephone numbers, and we think they're Zoom bombers. And I had a bad opportunity the other day of kicking off our county executive because I thought he was a Zoom bomber. He took a while, so he came back in. But the couple things, you should never set up a Zoom meeting without a password. That's number one, or a WebEx meeting. There should be a password that goes out in the email that allow people to come in. The second thing is if you're allowing registration from the outside for like a webinar, or I should say always require it. and make sure that they're at least putting their first name and email in, so we can actually identify, who they are. Not to go after them, but at least to know that they're a legitimate person versus somebody from God only knows where. And that's how we keep out Zoom bombers. It's been talked about a lot. One thing I'll say for Zoom, actually, the former head of WebEx did a security analysis of Zoom, which was published in Medium and a couple of the other online journals, actually complimenting them in terms of how quickly any issues that came up were resolved. And they are updating their software on a weekly basis. And as far as we can tell, it's been great. There's end-to-end security. The access security is good. And, the price is good too. So that's all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was terrific, Lyle. Very thorough. I thought maybe both Chris and Kristen could talk a little bit about how this is working in practice. I don't know if, Chris, you spoke a little bit about how the town is accommodating public meetings. Do you want to add anything regarding the technology that you're using and maybe some benefits and drawbacks?
One of the things that we found is a great benefit. Back in January, my colleagues on the town board and I had planned to migrate the meetings of our permitting boards to the courtroom because that's where we have the equipment for televising through streaming and then ultimately through the public access channel, our meetings. Well, we now don't have to worry about that because by having Zoom meetings, we can have multiple meetings take place on different accounts, sub-accounts within our Zoom account, and they can even take place at the same time. So we don't have to schedule courtroom time and see whether or not it conflicts with either the court itself or other meetings. So that's been a tremendous plus for us. The one thing that was in the question in part one of this that, I don't think we've been able to really address, and I think it's something that we are going to have to ask the governor's office about, is permissive referendums. Because permissive referendums do require going out and getting signatures on a petition. And, we toss that around a little bit. Maybe we would take a permissive referendum and just make it a referendum and just say, you know what, we're just going to have the referendum and then call it. And it might take a little longer, but at least if it's something vital, like a bond issue that's going to be absolutely vital to the financial wherewithal of the municipality, then we may have to take a look at that. But we have found that so many of the things that Lyle had identified are spot on, and that we had to be able to adapt to that and have someone who's got the technical expertise that's joining that call so that they can actually be in charge of disinviting someone or cutting that person off so that the person who's actually chairing the meeting can do the job of chairing the meeting and not have to worry about the technical aspects. I should also mention what Norma had mentioned about the roll call vote. We are doing that with all of our meetings now. Initially, we would always do voice votes on everything except maybe a bond issue or something of that nature. But now we are going through the roll. That's about the only thing that's requiring us to take more time. But actually, as has been noted before, we're finding tremendous efficiency in this platform. The ease of getting quorums, the ease of being able to see surveys and plats and be able to actually have the public see it as well. We think it's been a big plus. I'll turn it over to Norma.
Yeah, I was wondering if so originally I was thinking maybe Kristen, if you had heard anything from folks, if you've had questions from people out there across the state asking about technology. And we only have a couple minutes left on this particular topic, and it would be great to hear if there's been anything specific.
The biggest question that I have, I would say vastly outweighs all the other questions, is about transcription. It causes incredible amounts of stress when, everyone keeps, in the beginning, everyone was asking me, do they really mean word for word transcription? And we had confirmed with the governor's office that yes, that's exactly what they meant. You still have an obligation to prepare minutes, but in addition, in order to comply with this executive order, the transcript is required. We understand that this is not as simple as it may first appear. I'm advising municipalities that it doesn't have to be an immediate priority. Certainly, it just says later transcribed. So my feeling is, yes, if your remote access program will prepare it for you, then go ahead and let your remote access program prepare it for you. Lyle, did you say it was Otter? Because I had to write that down.
It's a weird name. It's OTTER.ai is the website.
Thank you for that, because I've gotten a lot of questions. People are stressed out. They're saying it's going to take me hours and hours to transcribe this meeting myself, and we don't really have funds, but that sounds like it might be a reasonable option.
Yeah,
So
it's certainly a lot cheaper than the other, hand transcriptions, but the hand transcriptions are more accurate.
Yeah, but that's been the biggest concern, and I've let people know that from our perspective that it doesn't need to be an immediate priority, and in fact, if you want to wait until there's maybe a FOIL request for it, and cross that bridge when you get to it.
That's a great discussion on technology and the issues people are coming up with. Our next topic is local government function, and this is just the day-to-day business. So some of the questions that we've had are, what is the effect of executive orders on acceptance of applications for building, land use applications? What about time frames, the need for tolling agreements? Are there executive orders regarding FOIL requests and how those are to be handled? And another question that we've had is, do the executive orders affect the statute of limitations for any reason? And for this, I'd like to turn to Eric Gordon for some specifics on what the executive orders tell us. Eric?
Thanks, Mary Beth. It's great to be here. Just for full disclosure, I'm also the town attorney for the town of Bedford, so I work with Supervisor Burdick very closely in trying to move forward on all these issues. As far as the local government functions, I think just from a general overall perspective, you're looking at when considering how to operate, you're obviously looking at public safety first, and that's always been during this crisis the primary issue. But you're also looking at the interests of the town, and then balancing it with the interests of the public to be able to get access to these functions or to continue to get serviced by the town. So that's sort of the overall perception. With respect to some of the individual issues, the supervisor raised the issue of the referendum, and that's a perfect one, a permissive referendum, which would typically be an action taken, a legislative action that would be subject to referendum. Question is it okay to go ahead? Because it requires, the public is then required to get signatures from a certain number of people, which in this time is really not a possibility. So it sort of, again, goes to that balance of, is this something the town really needs to go forward with now, or is it something that can be held off? Does that outweigh the need to have the permissive referendum? And as the supervisor said, maybe you just have a referendum anyway. So moving into the next type of function, as far as acceptance of land use application, the timeframes relating to those, and tolling. Again, we are accepting, in Newcastle, and I also do work with Newcastle and in Bedford and other municipalities. The applications can be submitted. They are being submitted electronically. Some municipalities still require a hard copy to be mailed, but everything's being submitted electronically. There are platforms for accepting large files. So that's all submitted. We're working on ways of accepting payment other than by check. There are credit card payments and there are other electronic payment methods for fees. So that's being incorporated by a lot of municipalities who have the technology. As far as existing approvals that you might have, land use approvals, there is no executive order that tolls approvals of land use approvals like subdivision approvals, site plans. So and even just general building permits. So people who have existing approvals do need to make sure to submit applications for extensions as otherwise required. They can be heard through, virtual meetings. And you should definitely get those submitted. That's what we're recommending to all our private clients, and that's what we're advising municipalities. With respect to FOIL, there's no FOIL is Freedom of Information law. As far as document requests from municipalities by the public, there is no executive order that has been issued with respect to FOIL. And what we've been advising our municipalities is you are still required to respond to the extent you can do so safely, your employees can do so safely. So if there are electronic documents that are available that can be provided electronically, go ahead and do that. If you really need to go into the basement, go into a vault to look and find files, if there is an essential employee who is able to come in and look at that, again, safely practicing social distancing, that's fine. The question of timing comes up, and typically you have 5 days to respond to a FOIL. We're advising that, if you can meet the 5-day time period, fine, but you're not going to be held to that standard. As long as you respond and advise people that you're still considering the request, you can keep putting it out for 20 days, 20 business days. And during this time, multiple extensions, we believe, no court's going to find that you weren't acting appropriately by taking multiple extensions, especially if it's hard copies of documents that need to be produced, especially due to the limited staff that many municipalities now have in place. And then on the remaining issue, as far as statutes of limitations, there is an executive order that has been issued, which tolls the statute of limitations relating to state law claims. And this is an important distinction. As far as federal law claims, there is no tolling. So if you have a federal law employment claim or other type of claim, that's not going to be tolled by the governor's executive order. State law claims will be, it's our interpretation as far as filing of notice of claims with municipalities, that is tolled, so as well as state law actions relating and including Article 78 proceedings. So if you have an approval of a land use and there is a filing of the approval resolution, the time to bring the Article 78 challenging that approval, it would be stayed, and I believe it's through April 29th now, I believe is the date that's been set. So as of April 29th, you would have 30 days to bring your Article 78 proceeding, assuming there's a resolution filed during the tolling period up to April 29th. So those are some specific government functions. Obviously, there are many others that we're delving into as this progresses, but with respect to those, that's what we're recommending.
Thank you, Eric. That was terrific. Norma, do you have any reactions to this? How is general government function happening from your perspective? And is the county still receiving applications, processing things? And I also know that you're a local official as well, so maybe you could add that perspective too.
Sure. Let me start with the county. So the county still has an obligation, the County Planning Board under General Municipal Law 239, to do referrals. So we still have to evaluate and review all of the, materials that are submitted by local municipalities where there may be, within the 500 feet of a municipality or a county or state facility, things of that sort. So we are continuing to do that. Fortunately, a couple of years ago, we had actually set that system up electronically anyway. But before this whole pause really took effect, our staff did a reminder email to all of the local municipalities, reminding them who to send their emails to with any referrals, certainly for the unforeseeable future, so that it would be reminded and telling them that they would be acted on, as quickly as possible. I mean, we generally have the 30 days to evaluate any referral that comes in anyway, but we haven't missed a beat on that. We're continuing to review the referrals, and that's one of the reasons the County Planning Board is meeting, because they actually adopt the referrals report to make sure, and they had a full discussion actually about a proposed zoning ordinance in one of the villages at their meeting last week. So again, we haven't missed a beat with that. FOILs, I got a FOIL today, so the FOILs are certainly coming in. We can evaluate based on what the request is that's asked whether we have access to the files that we need to be able to respond. We have been keeping a skeleton staff, one person at least on each side of our department, so that we do have, live bodies in the office in the event that somebody actually needs to actually get a file. So it's been working, again, that's been working fine for us. From the local perspective, I do know a lot of the municipalities in Westchester, and again, I'm in Dutchess County physically. That's where I live. So the building departments are closed to the public. All right, so you can't physically walk in with an application, but they are in fact continuing to accept those applications. And many of the boards are now starting to get up to speed with conducting their meetings online so that they don't hold up the review of those building applications and planning board and other applications.
That's terrific. Really quickly, Chris, as a local government official, anything to add?
Another area of what we do in local government are the services that we provide. And what we've been discussing thus far is how our permitting boards and operating boards, town board and so forth operate. But looking at what a local government does is we provide services. And from the outset, my focus has been on the essential services of public safety, ensuring that our police department is going to continue to be able to operate, reviewing with my police chief and my public works commissioner what would be the situation if 25% of your employees are on quarantine or self-isolation. Would you still be able to function? Looking at those questions. I look at those questions as well every 3 or 4 days through the Office of Emergency Management that I run for the chiefs of our fire departments and volunteer ambulance corps. How are you doing? Do you have people who are sidelined? Are you able to respond to calls? What do you need in the way of personal protective equipment? What do you need to continue your operations? And so my focus has always been on those essential services. Now, something that is going to fall by the wayside are things like, I don't think that we're going to be able to have a summer park season. I don't think that I'm going to be able to start a project that we have for renovation of a community building that we have for public meetings. Because for 2 reasons. One, it's not essential to the operation of government, but also because we may not have the money to carry it out. There's no question that in terms of the functions of a government, our budgets are busted, whether it's the state budget, the county budget, or our local budgets. They are busted. And so we have to figure out, what are we going to cut out? So that's one of the key questions that we don't have answers to right now. But when we're talking about operating a government, those are key to the public discourse that will take place.
That's so true, and certainly a topic that could be covered very broadly for a very long time, maybe a future topic for one of these panels. But that does segue nicely into our last technical topic, which is public contracts and labor, and the effect of Pause New York on those aspects of local government. Some of the questions that we have, and these are pretty legal, so we are going to look to to Eric Gordon, at least as a starting point, to talk about these. But what are the implications of force majeure, things like the doctrine of impossibility and frustration of purpose related to coronavirus and public contracts? Who or what determines what a safe work environment is, and what is essential construction? And the last one, which is a difficult question, which is, what is the presence of a positive COVID-19 person? Is it OSHA recordable or reportable? And how should municipalities and businesses be accommodating that? And Eric, do you want to give us an overview?
Sure. So just from a bird's eye view, as part of the executive orders that the governor has issued, he's determined what are essential businesses that can move forward. The executive order gives sort of broad overviews of what are considered essential, what can move forward during the pause. Part of that, so then the Empire State Development Corporation, which is a sub-entity of Albany's government, of the state government, has issued guidance with respect to what are considered essential businesses. It's a very important document, one of the most important documents that's been issued. It's been updated several times. There are also updates from the Ag and Markets and the New York State Department of Health with respect to what are essential businesses. So if you're operating a business, you need to look at those documents to know if you're permitted to operate. As far as with respect to construction, which is one of the specific issues, the guidance provides that certain types of construction are considered essential and are allowed to proceed. But as a subset of that, in order to proceed with any construction, you need to maintain a safe work environment. You need to comply with social distancing to the greatest extent possible. You know, if you have an emergency situation that needs to be addressed that can't be done with social distancing, that's the sort of one exception you might have. So you need to be aware of what type of construction is considered essential, whether you can go forward with it. So the first question deals with, well, what if you're not in essential construction, or what if you don't feel you're in essential construction? What happens to your contract? You have an existing contract to proceed with that construction, whether through with the municipality. We've had a number of projects that were ongoing, and relating to construction of buildings or different projects. And the question was, well, if it's not considered essential, what happens to that contract? And that's where the force majeure or impossibility or frustration of purpose comes into play. And basically, you have to look at the individual contracts for whether or not the existence of the epidemic, the existence of the governor's executive orders basically putting a halt to certain type of construction would either authorize a delay of the project, or if the delay lasts a certain amount of time, does it give contractors or the town or a municipality the ability to terminate a contract? That's typically how you look at it. Generally, force majeure and impossibility is looked at very narrowly by courts. They don't like to enforce those. So what we're typically providing is, where a contract involves construction that's not essential, you do delay it, you put it off, and a lot of this goes into the gray area of how long is this going to last? Is it going to result in termination of contracts? And that's really where it's going to get more into the, if a contractor says, well, I need to terminate, but I want to get paid for certain profits that I'm entitled to. That's really going to go into specifics of the contract. At this point, we're saying the basic guidance is put it off where you can, unless it's definitely considered essential. And that leads into the next question. Even if your project is essential and you can go forward, it needs to be a safe work environment. So who determines whether it's safe? And typically, and this is important because the governor's executive order says if you're not operating safely and complying with social distancing, you're subject to a $10,000 per day fine. So it's a serious issue. I don't know of any fines that have been issued to date. Maybe one of the other panel members does. But we are generally advising that it is the contractor, the general contractor, and the other prime contractors who are in charge of the site are the ones who have to make sure they have plans in place, and we're requiring all the contractors to come up with specific safety plans that deal with social distancing, or possibly having contractors come onto the site at different times in a staggered manner. These are all, are they wearing gloves? Do they have masks? Can they go out to lunch together? How that all works, all these things are taken into account. But it's typically the contractors that are responsible, not the owners of the project. And then finally, with respect to the OSHA issues, we really haven't dealt with that, but I did get the OSHA guidance on this that has been issued, and there was actually a most recent guidance issued on April 10th, an updated guidance. It is a recordable event, and typically it would be recordable if if you meet the requirements with respect to is it a work-related event becomes the big issue under OSHA. Certain types of businesses, I think including emergency responders, healthcare workers, are included where they always have to make that determination if it falls within that scope. However, work-related determination the OSHA has said you don't need to make that determination of COVID if one of your employees gets COVID, unless certain factors come up, like a number of employees have COVID, or you're aware that there's been reporting of COVID in the workplace of it. And it has to be an actual diagnosis of COVID. It can't just be symptoms of COVID. It can't just be some employee is sick and goes out on self-quarantine, or he or she goes out on self-quarantine. So it is recordable under certain circumstances, and there does have to be a work-related determination for certain factors, but in most cases it doesn't. If you do have a COVID person who were to have a fatality because of COVID, it would then become a reportable event under OSHA, assuming that it is a work-related event. So that's where, there is a good guidance from April 10th from OSHA that I recommend anybody who is concerned about that review, and that'll give you a lot of more specific information. So.
Great. Thank you, Eric. We're getting down to time, and I want to get to those silver linings. So, Chris Burdick, do you want to react to this in terms of how the town is handling public contracts? And then once we do that, we'll move on to our conclusion.
Sure. So we had 3 major projects, and I alluded to one of them, which we decided not to proceed with, and that was major renovation of a public building. And we determined that both from the standpoint of it not being essential, inability to conduct it while complying with the executive orders, and from a cost standpoint, we did not proceed with it. We actually didn't have to have conversations with the any contractors at that point, so that was actually a pretty easy call. We have gone ahead with a sewer project. We felt that was an essential project. We not only wanted to have in place a life safety plan by the contractor, but we wanted them to rewrite it. We wanted it to include and incorporate all of the provisions within the executive order. We required face masks and gloves before the governor had required them. We required not only the social distancing, but as Eric had alluded to, not even using the same tools. We took every measure possible that we could, even though it might have been a contractor and it was a contractor responsibility. A third project, which was work on a highway garage, we initially suspended it, then went back to the trades and asked them if they felt comfortable with updating their life safety plans, and that is going to be resuming on a modified schedule basis.
That's great. Those are really good, practical, everyday things that folks can think about and can apply, particularly the requirement to make contractors go back and look at their life safety plans to ensure that they cover this circumstance because it is new. So with that, let's move to our closing. I'm going to ask each of the panelists in turn to talk about the future implications of the changes of what we've all done to accommodate public business in this time when we have New York Pause in place. The questions are, will municipalities continue to conduct virtual meetings for some or all functions? Do virtual meetings expand or minimize public engagement? And what steps should be taken and on what level to advance the positive aspects of the changes in the conduct of public business? And Chris, since you're still here, why don't you start us off?
Eric and I were batting that around before this started up. And I think that this will permanently change the way that we do business. And I do think that there's some significant benefits of it. We alluded to the ability of a planning board to actually see, Lyle had mentioned, that you can actually take Zoom, and it's a fabulous platform for not only seeing the site plans, but being able to put notations on it. And our planning board chair has embraced it, and I can't see her going back to the in-person meeting when it comes to that sort of thing. We might find that there's some kind of hybrid that develops, that you have both the in-person meeting and maybe it's coupled in some way with the Zoom platform or WebEx platform, so that you're able to marry the two and be able to get the benefits from both. I see that as some strong possibilities. And also, of course, the way that we're doing more in remote carrying on our business, whether it's our town clerk or building inspector, I see that continuing.
Thank you, Supervisor. Norma, what do you, from the county perspective and from your local community in Dutchess County, what do you see happening, and what do you see those positive effects of this moving forward?
So I think this is going to lend us to a new normal, where we're going to be much more receptive to people, and particularly our board members, actually coming into and joining the meetings in an electronic or virtual platform. it's been allowed, and I've done it on some of the boards that I've been on, school board and other things. But you always had to give the address where you were and stuff like that. But I think people have now seen and have gotten so much more comfortable with the platforms themselves to see that it really does work. And so I do expect that it should help us in the future in terms of getting quorums for our meetings, because, somebody who might not be able to, again, physically get there might be able to, notice that they'll be able to be at a location where the public can join them where they are. I also see on a day-to-day aspect that it's going to make employees and employers much more comfortable with employees working from home in the event that they need to, because we now all know we can join in on meetings and we can continue to participate very actively. Just because we're not physically there, it still works.
That's terrific. Lyle, from a technical perspective, you've been engaged in the media for many, many years. So you're used to reaching out and getting folks involved. What do you really see what are the changes that are going to have to be made on a long-term basis for people to embrace this idea of remote meetings?
Well, I think we've been doing remote meetings as a world for 40 years. And I think finally, with this crisis, people finally figured out that the internet is actually a real thing and not a game. And it's something valuable for our culture. I spoke with our town board yesterday about it. I get their input for this meeting. And I think they're in the same place Chris is in Bedford, is that it's really been phenomenal for them. Meetings go faster, they're better organized. They can get access to documents that, rather than shuffling through paper. So I think in our case, we're going to, keep it going and in some senses expand it. I mean, yes, we'll go back to traditional, in quotes, assembly room meetings where we need to, but I think, Chris nailed it. It's going to be a hybrid, and it's going to be part of the fabric of how we govern. And the price points are so low. I think that's the other thing to think about is, you talk about a transcription, full price, $60 an hour. You talk about WebEx or, Zoom is $15 a month. These are very cost-effective technologies that have been around and certainly proven at scale. So I think the fear's down, and I think people are gotten used to it. I think they will even more over the next couple of months.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I agree with you. I think in business, we've been doing remote meetings for really as long as I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not made it to the public sector, so it's good to see. Eric, would you like to talk a little bit about what changes? We have these executive orders. They all have end dates, so this is not permanent. What changes would we need to see in terms of open meetings law or other things, other statutory changes or regulatory changes that are going to be necessary to, we've just heard some really compelling reasons why these remote meetings and the technology use has become very valuable. What will need to happen to make that permanent?
Well, I think, Norma brought up one of the issues of having to give addresses of under the current open meetings law, where you're remote broadcasting from, where a board member is, and I know that's been a concern that location has to be open to the public, and I don't think too many board members want people coming into their homes, or having access to where they are. So it would be a good change, and Kristen, I'm sure knows, a good change in the open meetings law if there would be a way to rectify that issue so that this could continue. This type of participation by board members and still have a quorum and still be able to proceed with the meeting could be done remotely. I think, as has been raised, there should still be a public aspect where the public can actually come to a meeting. I don't think we're going to do away with that. I don't see that in the near future. However, it'd be a great service to the public to be able to get into a meeting at home and be able to participate in a meeting at home. Yes, you could watch it on your computer and your TV, and you could maybe email in some comments, but to be able to participate in real time from your home or from your office at a meeting, for a lawyer like me who has sometimes 3-4 meetings a week, you don't always want to have to go out and sit through a 3-hour meeting for your 10-minute application. So think that's a real benefit. What changes would have to be put in place? There would probably have to be some changes to the open meeting law that would have to be considered by the state government. And then just as far as technology, I think you're going to, for patterns, I know in talking about them, some of the upstate communities, would hopefully get improvements in infrastructure in order to allow this to be statewide. Because I know, we're somewhat, we're in Westchester, there's a good infrastructure there, but that's another thing that's going to have to take place in order to give all communities the same benefits of the remote virtual meeting system.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting topic as well. We still have broad areas of the state without access to high-speed broadband. And that's going to be a requirement for all of these technologies.
Right.
Kristen, do you want to address, it sounds to me like we're listening to a series of panelists who are saying that this new way of doing business is actually increasing enfranchisement. It's actually allowing more participation by a broader group of people in a new and unique way. Do you want to address what you've been hearing statewide about that? And if there are any areas where we would need to strengthen some things, and what's going really, really well?
In the beginning, there was a lot of anxiety and fear. And how are we supposed to do this? And it hasn't been long enough. There's still municipalities that have just decided, well, we're going to close down public access and we're not going to provide remote access because we can't figure out how to do it. And that's really not obviously an acceptable response at this point. It is so easy. I mean, as Lyle mentioned, there's these programs that are available. They're cost effective. They're not difficult to use. The municipalities, they are embracing it, and I have heard over and over again that they do feel that this is increasing access. I think hybrid was, the term that Chris used, and that's an important word because I don't think we will ever get to the point, and I don't think we should be at the point that all virtual is the way to go. You still need to allow. You need to have a gathering place. You need to have a place where the public can show up and see their public officials in front of them. I would be very concerned if we got to the point where the public was invited to town hall and the only person there was the town clerk taking minutes and all of the town board members were sitting at home in their living room being able to log on to their meetings. I think that would become problematic and it wouldn't reflect well on them as public officials. I do think that video conferencing by public officials should only be used when necessary. I think if they have the ability to be in person at a municipal hall, town hall, village hall, whatever it may be, I think that's where they should be. However, I love the idea of having those meetings with the town officials there if they can be. And in addition to that, making the meeting available to the public by remote access. I think that is wonderful and it increases availability. I'm sure significantly, just as Eric mentioned, that it's so parents have such a difficult time and busy professionals have a difficult time to spend 3 hours at a school board meeting or a town board meeting or whatever it may be. If they can access it, at home or on their smartphones, it would make life a lot easier for a lot of people.
I think one of the things that's been an interesting point is particularly when we have the projects where maybe it's a project before a planning board and site plans are being shown or drawings of some nature of a project. In a traditional meeting, unless there is some kind of a video link and the applicant has brought a thumb drive with the information on it, the average person in the audience can't see what's being presented. Mm-hmm. So there's a tremendous benefit to that aspect of this alone. It's much more transparent. And that's really a wonderful benefit. So we've had a great discussion today. I very, very much appreciate everyone's contributions. And I want to thank Pattern for Progress for hosting our discussion and thank each of our panelists for your time and your thoughts about how we're keeping local government open at this time of New York pause. And I wish everyone well and please be safe. Thank you.